Entirety as a single thing that you're going to do something to. So project is the thing. A task is something, an action you can do against the project. Tasks are things like I'm going to compile the code. I'm going to create a WAR file. I'm going to run a suite of tests. A plugin is a piece of code that you use to define tasks or other information that's important. So inside the build.gradle file, you could create your own task that says, okay, I'm going to do this, whatever this is. Or you can externalize that. And there's a lot of externalized plugins that do just that. If you've gone into build.gradle, you've almost certainly seen a line that says something like apply Java. Apply Java is using the Java Gradle plugin to define tasks for that project. And there are lots of plugins. There's a Maven Publish plugin that we're in the process of migrating slowly to, and that's what actually takes the uPortal build when it's done and puts a WAR file out in the world. So that way, when you go to Gradle start, here's my new version of uPortal. So Maven Publish, the task, the build task from that plugin, copies it out to Maven somewhere. So that way, when you go into uPortal start, you have a new version that you can reference. Dependency is something that's a little overloaded. In this context, it's referencing all of the different jars, all the different all the different Java artifacts that you need to run the tasks for the task at hand for that specific project. So in this case, we would have a lot of different references to things like Spring or Apache Commons or JAXB for dynamically building Java classes, and there's a laundry list of them. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on a subsequent slide, but there's another use of the word dependency here, which you probably have seen if you've gone into these task definitions. Depends on, depends before, do before and do after. Those are referencing the sequencing of events, and those are also dependencies, but they're different than what we're talking about here. Okay, so there are three fundamental files that are driving how a specific project gets built. The build.gradle is, okay, tell me all about the tasks that we're going to run, include all the plugins that have the definitions for those tasks. Gradle properties is where we're keeping a lot of the configurations for all of the different dependencies rather than having dependency versions stored in the build Gradle. We're externalizing those into a single location. It also contains configurations for the Gradle application itself. And then finally, settings.gradle is really critical for management. If you have a main project like uPortal and you've got 37 sub-projects like uPortal, RDBMS, etc., you're going to list all of those sub-projects in this class, so that way Gradle knows where it needs to do specific build information or specific build tasks for sub-projects. Okay. So I talked a little bit about this already, Gradle tasks. Let's see. the one thing that's wasn't obvious to me, because I'm primarily a Maven build developer up until fairly recently, was how you run commands against sub projects directly, and I didn't fully appreciate this until recently. But because of the way we've got it organized, we can do builds against subcomponents and get them deployed without having to do the entirety of a Gradle build. Gradle spends a lot of time trying to be efficient. If a task has already been completed and nothing has changed, it won't rerun that task. You'll notice there's a under uPortal start, for example, there's a .gradle folder. Actually, no, it's not even a .gradle. It's going to be under the individual projects. There's a build folder, and that will contain artifacts for stuff that's already been generated. This gives you the opportunity, in this case, it says overlays uPortal data import. What that's telling you is that within the main project, you can go into the overlays folder, and underneath that, you can go into the uPortal folder, and then underneath that, you can run the data import task within that particular sub project. So you don't have to do the entirety. This is really useful as a developer if you're making a change in the one specific part of the application. You don't have to do something destructive across the entirety of the application, or as expensive of resources across the entire application. You do it just in that one area. Data import is a good one because you're just using the task within uPortal. You have a specific file that's in uPortal, and you can deploy that without having to do a whole bunch of other stuff. And I would say I mean the computer. You're issuing a command, you're sitting back and letting the computer do a thing. Letting the computer only work in one small part makes it more efficient.
Another interesting thing about tasks is that you had mentioned the dependencies on when different you'll define a task, and you can define kind of in its multi-step processing of that task when certain things can happen.
Yes.
Another really interesting thing, and you alluded to this as well, is that you can set up tasks such that you can say this task should run after this other task if you're explicitly calling a sequence of tasks. So it will try to reorder. If there's a thing where, well, you have to run this task before me, or if you specify the task run this before me, there's like a couple of other conditionals like that allow you to
it
allow
depends
the
on
developer to sequence tasks efficiently. However, again, as you mentioned, that adds another layer of complexity that needs to be managed by the person who's developing the tasks, understanding all the interactions. And so that's where Gradle becomes a greater effort as a tool. Let's say Maven, very much opinionated and says, you're going to put source code here. This is how you're going to configure multi-module projects, multi-sub-project projects.
The phrase is a directed acyclic graph, which we'll talk about briefly a little bit farther down the line. But that's exactly what's needing to happen here is well, I mainly put these slides together so I could remember where I was if we got into some conversations that I lost my place. So there's no intent I don't have to run through these in any specific order to cover the material. So we talked about that, talked about tasks a little bit, and the plugins. Let's see here.
Slide 16.
Yeah, there we go. 14. Yeah, we can go down here a little bit. Directed acyclic graph. That just sounds cool. It sounds like there's a lot of work involved. And really, all that's intending to say is that you can tell the application do things in this specific order without explicitly having to say do this in this specific order. Let's say, for example, that you want to deploy a war file out to the Maven repository. Well, there are certain things that have to happen in a certain order. You have to be able to compile tasks, you have to run tests, you have to assemble it into a war. Maybe you have to generate a report of code coverage. Maybe you want to do some code quality and have Lint tell you that, yeah, these files don't look good. Well, there's an ordering that you're going to want to do that in. And when you're defining the build.gradle and you're applying all these plugins, you can specify, okay, this is the first task that has done, and it says, there's depends on, there's due last, and there's due first are the three that I've seen, and there may be more. But you can say, okay, well, I don't want you to run the tests until after you have compiled the classes. Seems reasonable. But you're not going to necessarily tell it specifically, these are the 37 things that have to happen. You're going to say, this thing has to be done. Well, and this thing has dependencies. And so these things have to be done. And these things have dependencies. And so these things have to be done. I talked a little bit about efficiencies and caching. That was one of the changes that came about with the migration to Java 11 in the build process. Gradle stands apart from uPortal. Let me back up here just a little bit. Gradle is not a Java build tool. It is a build tool. It does not care anything about the technology that it's building. It runs just fine over C++. It runs just fine over XML docs. You just have to have a plugin or a task defined that will tell you, okay, this is what I do and this is how I do it. The language that Gradle uses in this case runs in the JVM. It's compiled as a JVM, if I remember correctly. And the language within the DSLs are either Kotlin or Groovy at this point, but it doesn't care what it's acting on as long as there's a task defined that knows how to do it. The change that happened, it was a path, a folder change within Gradle where it was looking for some specific files. This is interesting because you can make changes within uPortal that Gradle doesn't know anything about as long as the plugins still support it. So we're still running into issues, or I think we resolved them all now as far as Java 11. Let me mention Gradle W here for just a second. In order to simplify how builds are done, we want to encapsulate everything as much as possible. Have it in source code repository. Most developers will have Gradle installed on their local environment. Gradle W is basically a version of Gradle that is stored in the code repository with your project. One of the first things you do when you have a project, you want to make it Gradle enabled, is you run a command called Gradle init. And what Gradle init will do is it'll make copies of the environment for Gradle that you have in your local environment, and it'll put it into that code repository. It'll also create some subfolders and a bunch of other infrastructure. The net result is that the next person who downloads your project from wherever your repository, Bitbucket, GitHub, somewhere else, if you're running Gradle W, you can guarantee that you're running exactly the same version of Gradle as the person who created the project. That's had any number of occasions where various projects will run. Hey, well, it runs on my environment, but we'll run on the other person's environment. Well, if you're running exactly the same build tool because it's stored literally with the project, that's what Gradle W buys you. So if you're thinking, oh, well, I just run the Gradle commands from my local environment, that will may work, probably will work, but not going to get guaranteed that it will work. And there are breaking compatibility issues between Gradle 6 and Gradle 7. Trying to move to Gradle 7, did some recent work moving some configurations from You probably saw compile has been replaced with implementation. In
Yeah.
in the dependencies, and that seems stupid. Well, why is that important? Well, it's because compile as a command has been deprecated. It'll go away in Gradle 7. Just had a thought. That's not good. Did I have a reference to it here? I think I did. That's unfortunate. So we talked about the life cycle, the directed acyclic graph, talked about Gradle W, language independence, how it's efficiently not rerunning commands that have already been successfully run. Okay. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of talking, and unfortunately for you guys, Laura led some really good interactive ones, and I haven't had a whole lot of interactive opportunity on this one. Any questions, any observations, any concerns about Gradle as a tool going forward?
Yeah, I don't like it.
No, why don't you like it?
Let's go back to Maven. My concerns with Gradle are that there's not a language underneath there, and so when we're looking at these tasks, you're writing code. Problem is, they also are changing some of the dependents that they've written that support the tasks. So we're finding silly errors as we migrate up the Gradle ladder of versions. Like, we used to be able to use new file in the literal to create a reference to a file that we want to process, right? So at some point, and it wasn't a major Gradle change, it was a minor version change, that broke. So all of the tasks, which there weren't a lot, but there were a handful, fortunately, we don't run those very often. So they existed for a while where that was broken. And the fix is, instead of using new file, where new is referencing file capital F as a new class to create a new class for this literal. Now it's just use their new file lowercase reference that's built in. It's like, that's silly. Why break?
Well, there's a concern I have with the way uPortal itself is organized and the complexity that is now inherent in our build process to address the fact that it is that complicated. I know we're going to have some conversations later in the week regarding architecture and roadmap, and this may fit squarely in the middle of that. We've had some conversations, Laura, Benito, Chris, and myself, specifically talking about how, pardon?
Okay.
I'm sorry, it's a secret. Don't tell me. Talking specifically about how uPortal itself is organized as a project. It went through a pretty significant metamorphosis from uPortal 4 to uPortal 5 in the code repository. And it may require, well, require is not the right word. We have choices as developers. We can do anything as long as we solve the problem. But it might make sense to go in and revisit some of the decisions that were made and some of the ways that things are organized. I look at the Gradle implementation, how we're currently using it, and I think that some of the complexity that we're dealing with could be eliminated by reorganizing how uPortal itself is organized. But I'm not a big fan of polishing the apple. If you got something that's working, then just let it work. That's why we haven't pulled an ant out of it, because we've got something that's working. But it highlights the situation that, okay, well, something changes that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, how broad of an impact does it actually have? If we've got one change in this file that affects all of this other stuff, well, that tells me that there's a code smell that we probably should do something about. I'm not just talking uPortal code, I'm talking about the configure the build tool code smell as well. My personal gut reaction without any kind of data to back it up is that uPortal might benefit from breaking it up from a single monolithic jar, monolithic war into some jars that encapsulate some of the complexity. And that might simplify the build process as well. But then again, it might not simplify it at all, because at the end of the day, we end up with a uPortal war file that has to get deployed.
Well, I like Maven in that it is opinionated. And what I think what was missing was no one was willing to go and create. Someone has in the past created custom Apereo Maven plugins that are specific for these repos. And some of the work, like doing data init and data import and export. And Gradle was adopted to gain greater flexibility, but all the code written to do some of these more interesting things, like deploy to Tomcat, right? Package up everything into a zip file to be deployed. Those are interesting, and some of those are really simple to do, but they're showing their age with Gradle changing so much over the last 4 years. I've had to go over and spend a lot of time on those tasks where I'm thinking maybe we would have been better served creating or continuing with Maven, adding the few extra things that we're missing, and then we're just dealing with code. And the related aspect is Gradle 7 requires Java 11 or higher, I believe. So we're going to have to abandon Java 8 support. I'm fine with that, but it prevents us from adopting Java 7 or Gradle 7 today.
Yeah.
And we can't jump any higher as of that constraint of Gradle 6 requires older versions. And Maven just runs with all of them. It just works out of the box. You got a modern Maven tool installed. It'll run with Java 6 up to Java 21. No.
And this may reflect some of the fact that our CI/CD process maybe it needs a little bit of loving. I've been getting these renovate bot emails like crazy here over the last few weeks. Every time a new dependency gets identified as, okay, this has been updated to this version. Things evolve so quickly, and it's so easy to end up where your dependency hell trying to get I've literally punted on some stuff that would make sense to fix, but it's like, okay, I can't figure out why this is working and this one isn't. I think that Gradle as a concept is good, and I think that our implementation reflects the complexity of the environment. But having an environment that's so complicated that you can't keep it running and move forward.
Well, I've been following Gradle for the last 4 years, and I guess all that notwithstanding, they actually have said, or if you follow the documents from 4, where we started to try to get into 7, they really have gone and said, this is how you do a thing. Module project, here's how the tasks interact, and then Gradle 5 is, we don't like the way that happens. We're going to reinvent the model, not we're going to enhance it or fix it. And now you're in 6, and everything's in 4 just don't work. So now that you're right, if all we had was a simple Java app with 2 modules, and compile and install to create the workflow. Well, we don't care about the build tool,
right?
But this is supposed to be a build tool that's extensible, and we can do a bunch of stuff for our build process. Well, we've done that, and now we're paying the cost, because now every time they decide, here's the new way to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, so we don't have the resources to redevelop. We just patch it so it keeps working and not until it breaks.
Yeah.
So that's a combination of the authors of Gradle keep moving the goalposts, and we have a lot of complexity that we kind of slammed in there by folks who aren't necessarily Gradle experts, because I don't think any of us are.
I certainly don't claim to be a Gradle expert. I was I can't even say I was a Maven expert, but I had been using Maven for the better part of 10 years, and I could just keep things moving forward. I never had to wrestle with the build tool. I might have dependency problems, but that wasn't the build tool's problems. That was Spring needed this and this other tool needed that, and they didn't get along with each other. And so, okay, well, we'll figure an exclusion or something. We'll figure it out. But it wasn't the build tool that I was wrestling. So I don't know
Sorry, I
if
just
maybe
wanted to interject.
no, yeah,
Because
that was great. That was great. I don't know if we have an opportunity or even an interest in reverting to a Maven centric environment, because we are in a mixed environment now. We still have Maven, we still have Ant, we have Gradle also.
It's just all hidden. You want to go over that last line? You ready for
Oh, the last slide was really
16 and 17, sorry.
yeah, okay, yeah, this is a list I stole at the observation of Benito the other day, that there are a lot of commands that we use regularly that maybe we don't all know about, or maybe we do all know about and just haven't had the chance. This is not a comprehensive list by any stretch of the imagination, and these are primarily probably plugins that we've written. Not even the stuff for code coverage or compile or more foundational stuff. And this is just an observation of different types of commands and what they would look like out in the world. Notice the Gradle W syntax. And actually, I really like Gradle W. I couldn't tell you how many times I've had to wrestle with, okay, different versions, whatever. Having all that stuff buried in the application itself is, I like that a
I
lot.
tell you what, I'm the same way. That is definitely one of the big benefits of Gradle. You just need Java and the repo, and you can do so much.
Yes. So that was it. That was all I had intended to cover for this. Just a bit of personal feedback. Is this a good audience for going over technical stuff like this? Because I mean, there's a couple of constraints. One is we've got a broad audience, different people doing different jobs, and it's probably not going to be relevant or interesting to at least a segment. And the second part is, in 45 minutes, it is impossible to go and do justice to a technical topic like this, where they offer multi-day courses over trying to get you an expert on this material. Was this a good use of your time?
So I don't know if I'll talk for Ryan here. So we are technical, we are the techies. So in terms of talking technology or commands, that's not a problem. That's not an issue. We can definitely have those conversations. For me specifically, the dilemma with Gradle versus Maven as building for uPortal, for me as the consumer of it, I guess I'm less concerned about how internally it's managed, because in the end of it, all we really need is we need a command that builds it for us. We need that final command. We need that final WAR that we can deploy. And we want that to build as fast and efficiently as possible. What tools or tools are used behind it, I personally don't think I care. I can see him shaking his head. And of all these commands and tasks that are listed here, we do use a couple of them, but I would almost prefer to know what the required sequences are so that we can embed them into other places where I'm going to use the word build very, very loosely. You know, we want to create Docker images or fit things into our own CI/CD. And like for Tomcat, for instance, we use our own Tomcat as standalone. So ultimately, we just need the WAR. We don't need commands that handle any embedded versions that, you guys might want to have for smaller schools, let's say. HSQL, we use external databases other than our developers, which we do use HSQL there. But I think in his scripts that he's written, he calls at least the start command. But lately, as I've been playing around with Docker, I actually just like running HSQL. I use the SQL tool, at the command if I need to put inserts and things there, and then, we'll just stop it by running HSQL's normal server commands. I don't need a Gradle task to do that. Maybe we could create like an alias or simplified version. I know that's what you're trying to do here. That could be nice, but then we don't really need all of that kind of depth. I don't know if I answered the question there, right? So technical, yes. Gradle, how you're building it, probably less so, as long as we get just a couple of clean commands that we can run.
Yeah, I think technical is good. I think for me at least, it's good to learn more about Gradle. I should probably know more about it. But I sort of really hope I never have to dig into the weeds with it.
Well, and that's that really is the question. Gradle is intended to take the complexity and hide it from you, so that way somebody else deals with the ugly and you just type key and you're done.
Yeah.
The question becomes, okay, every once in a while you have to peel back the curtain and take it and see that the wizard is not really a big important guy. I have all powerful laws. No, it's just some developers who figured out a way to simplify this. And you might find yourself in a situation where, okay, I have a tool that I already know how to use, but I want to do something else. And having some familiarity with what's going on the back end, behind the curtain, may give you some insights as to, okay, well, do I want to climb that learning curve and learn how to use that tool, learn how to develop in that tool, or it's like, no, I'm not going to go there and do something else. I as a personal example, I've used Jenkins as a build tool, and I've had great success with it. Do I know how to actually configure Jenkins as no? You don't want me doing, no, you don't want me being a sysadmin in that environment, trying to get stuff deployed. Gradle, and I don't want to equate Jenkins as a tool for a CI/CD environment and Gradle, because Gradle is something that Jenkins would call to run these individual tasks. But I find that the more I aspire to be a full stack developer, the farther short I fall, because there is just so much stuff. You need to have some things that just work, so you don't have to understand all of the things that are going on behind the scenes. Gradle is one that I think knowing what's going on in the back end is useful, but everybody doesn't know how it works.
I think we just want to become an effective user.
Yeah.